Right, so we'll just start the recording just now, and we shall just kick off. Okay, good morning, everybody. It's the breakfast briefing again, back to the first Wednesday of the month, Wednesday, 2nd of February. So where we are today is we're going to be discussing just a general employment law update regarding COVID-19. Some things have happened over the last few while. I just want to give you a general update, and then hopefully engender a bit of discussion at the end with a question and answer session. And hopefully we've got a couple of guest speakers in from our member companies who are going to give some hints and tips from the front line, from the HR perspective as well. So what we're going to cover today: GP fit notes, then a wee brief touch on the ACAS code of practice and disciplinary and grievance procedures, self-isolation timescales, which I know is causing some people a little bit of grief in HR land. Changing sick pay, you probably have seen that as being a hot topic in the media regarding some companies who are and some companies who aren't changing sick pay as regards vaccination status. Returning to the workplace as well, you'll all be aware of Nicola Sturgeon's recent announcements, but we'll just discuss that in brief as well. And then, as I said, we'll get some member companies' experience as well. So, GP fit notes, as we can see there, usually last for 7 days, except for that short window from the 10th of December 21 through to the 26th of January 22. Then it was for 28 days duration. That was to try and alleviate some stress and workload for GP practices, because many people were coming in and asking for things which are relatively straightforward. Whereas if they can just self-isolate for 28 days, then that reduces the burden on an already stretched NHS as well. Whenever you're given a fit note, and this is not just in COVID-19 circumstances, what to do is check through for these 5 things when you get a fit note. So, number 1, is the doctor assessed the employee whether they're fit for work or maybe fit for work? Check the duration of the fit note and when it expires, and obviously discuss it with them as well, with the employee, about to see if we can agree any changes with them to get them back into work. Now, you'll have heard me mention the words reasonable adjustments to you if you've ever phoned me for employment law advice, and that may well fall into this sort of category here. What to do is also use the fit note as evidence for your sick pay procedures. I know that some Sage payroll providers, for example, require a fit note for certain things to kick in on Sage, and obviously just for HR purposes, and certainly if there's ever any challenge to the way you've dealt with a sickness absence, make sure you keep a copy of the fit note for your records. So, moving on to the second subtopic, ACAS guidance, disciplinary and grievance procedures. Everything in blue on the notes is a hyperlink, and when the notes get sent out to you later on, it means you can click through and actually read through these things in detail as well. But I'll just give you an overview at the moment. The ACAS code, it doesn't apply to dismissals regarding redundancy on the non-renewal of fixed-term contracts, but what it does, it provides basic practical guidance for employers, employees and their representatives. Basically, it sets out principles for handling disciplinaries and grievance situations in the workplace. Now, if you don't follow it unreasonably, if there's an unreasonable failure to comply with the code, then there could be a 25% uplift in awards if it goes to an employment tribunal and you lose. So things like not holding meetings for not a good reason, not providing the right of appeal, not attending meetings if you're an employee, not appealing something when you possibly could have. Again, those are all things that could sway awards up to 25% that way, or down 25% that way as well. Now, as you can see there by that second hyperlink, ACAS have issued some guidance regarding disciplinaries and grievance during coronavirus. And the things that they're asking you to think about during this time is, do you actually go ahead or do you delay the disciplinary or the grievance process? Now, you've got to consider the seriousness of the allegations. So something urgent or time sensitive might need rapid action. Something less so could possibly be delayed until fewer restrictions are in place. Those are all things that you need to weigh up. And what to do is phone through to the legal team here and we can advise you on best practice and the way forward. Now, meetings should still be held, because one of the fundamentals of disciplinary grievance procedures is that the employee gets to put their case across and the employer gets to put their case across as well. So there has to be a valid two-way communication between the parties. Now, depending on the circumstances, that can be remote or in person or partial or whatever. Obviously, minutes should be kept and letters should be sent as well. And you'll hear myself, Dermot, Amy, and Lindsay drone on about the importance of documentation, contemporaneous documentation when it comes to disciplinary and grievance procedures. And obviously, at the tail end there's always the right to be accompanied by a work colleague or a trade union rep in disciplinary or grievance procedures as well. That hasn't trade union rep dial in, or everybody comes in from a remote Zoom location or Teams location like this, but there still has to be the right to be accompanied, most certainly, as it's a statutory right. Now, self-isolation timescales. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Switch Engineering sent out a summary PDF, and if you've lost that in your emails, that will be on this hyperlink as well, which is based on the NHF Inform Scotland guidance. So if you want to read about it in a bit more detail, then that second hyperlink will assist you there. This is very similar in guidance to what the NHS have put on their website in England and Wales as well. So, 2 self-isolation situations. Number 1, testing positive for COVID-19, where vaccination status is not relevant. And number 2, however, being a close contact where vaccination status is relevant. Now, before we move on to the next slide, this is a wee quick recap of terminology. PCR test stands for polymerase chain reaction, and LFD test is a lateral flow device test. I know some people used LFT as the shorthand. Now, so where we are here is we're testing positive for COVID-19 where vaccination status is not relevant. You can see down one side, you get symptomatic self-isolation, and self-isolation must last for 10 days from the date of the symptoms started. And employees are allowed to exit self-isolation after 7 days as long as they have no fever and record 2 negative LFD tests. On the right-hand side, asymptomatic self-isolation produces a positive test. If symptoms develop, a confirmatory PCR test is not needed, and if they don't need to restart their isolation period. And further on down on the right-hand side, employees are allowed to exit self-isolation after 7 days, similar on the left-hand side, as long as they have no fever and record 2 negative LFD tests. Now, the words I've highlighted in red there at the bottom are a direct screenshot from the NHS Inform website. This guidance applies regardless of age, vaccination status, or previous infection. So in summary, whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic, you can exit after 7 days self-isolation if you get 2 negative lateral flow device tests. However, this one here, being a close contact, this is where vaccination status is relevant here. So on the left-hand side, if somebody is vaccinated, then in summary, they can exit self-isolation if they are taking daily LFD tests, okay? And obviously these come out negative as well. However, on the right-hand side, unvaccinated, they must self-isolate for 10 days, even if the PCR test is negative. So whether somebody is vaccinated or not may impact their availability for work. If they're unvaccinated and not part of a clinical trial, which is mentioned further up, or have a specific medical reason, then they're self-isolating for 10 days, unlike a vaccinated person who can take those daily LFD tests, which leads us nicely on to changing sick pay. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, this is very, very topical. There are a number of major employers cutting their sick pay for some unvaccinated staff, okay? So remember earlier on, we're talking about medical exempt or clinical trials. So, Ocado, Morrison's, Next, IKEA, Wessex Water, they have all cut their sick pay. However, on the other side, we have some major employers not doing so. So John Lewis, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, they seem to come from mostly the retail side of the world. So factors to consider when you're considering changing sick pay. Number 1, is it contractual or is it only just a policy? Generally, sick pay is a contractual thing. So if you're wanting to change any term and condition of a contract, be an express term or an implied term, then technically consultation is required to change those terms and conditions. However, even if you do get the bilateral agreement to the change, which is unlikely because people are not going to be wanting to have their sick pay cut, then later a change is possible by the employees at the employment tribunal if a unilateral change is imposed, and even if it's not challenged when the change is made, because the courts have found that if an employer essentially imposes a unilateral contract change, sometimes by the employee's ongoing affirmation of the contract, they can be eventually deemed to have accepted the change. However, if that change doesn't have an immediate impact on the employee, then them working on their contract, still doing their normal job and accepting their pay might not be sufficient affirmation of them when the thing that's going to cause them the detriment doesn't perhaps happen for a number of months or weeks afterwards. So that's something you have to bear in mind as well. There's always a possible discrimination risk if an employee can link the disadvantages they're suffering to what's known as a protected characteristic. In this case, it's likely going to be disability as a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. Now, to defend against such a claim, you're going to have to prove that your actions were a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. And that's actually lifted directly from the Equality Act as well. So rather than going along the more adversarial route of imposing a unilateral contract change, what to do is, again, to try and continue to encourage staff to get the vaccine. So further factors to consider when you're wanting to change sick pay. Here is a direct lift, a direct lift from the ScotGov Coronavirus Fair Work Statement, which was last updated on 17th of December 2020. I'll read it out to you. No worker should be financially penalised for following medical advice. Any absence relating to COVID-19 should not affect future sick pay entitlement or other entitlements like all their accrued time. It should not result in formal attendance-related warnings or be accumulated with non-COVID related absences and future absence management figures. This may require flexibility in standard absence attendance management arrangements. Now, that is just a statement. It is guidance. Very much it will come down to the individual circumstances that each employer faces, but it'll be useful if you could bear that in mind when you're taking any decisions going forwards. However, as you can see, vaccination status is not mentioned in that status there. However, it is medical advice to get vaccinated. For example, both the BMA, the British Medical Association, which is the trade union for doctors, fully supports the vaccination campaign, and the GMC, which is the General Medical Council, which is the regulatory body for doctors, again, says that doctors should be immunised against common serious communicable diseases, unless this is contradicted. And that, I would suggest, includes coronavirus. So, returning to the workplace. Now, as you know, there were extra hospitality restrictions over the festive period, and the safer business and workplace guidance for COVID-19 is still in place, still in force. And this was last updated on the 20th of January 22. Now, as you'll be aware, from the 17th of January 2022, large outdoor events, restrictions were removed on that, and people were able to resume without capacity or physical distancing limits. From the 24th of January 2022, the restriction on attendance at events, including indoor, were removed from the guidance, and also the guidance on 3 household mixing was also removed as well. So as you can see, what was once very, very restrictive is now opening up again in the general population. Now, however, face masks are still widely required indoors. There's obviously potential for that to be changing down in England, if not already, but certainly in Scotland, as per the guidance on the hyperlink there, it's still widely required. Now, ventilation guidance as well. Ventilation is given its whole section on the Scottish Government website. The provision of fresh air into indoor environments is essential for preventing the spread of COVID-19. By taking measures to increase the volume of outside air entering a building, such as opening windows, doors, or vents, companies can help minimise the risk of spreading COVID-19 to others. And also, risk assessments. These are key. They're required. Basically, risk assessments are used to identify what measures are needed to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission at work and can be used to eliminate or mitigate the risks, adapt workplaces to individual needs, and ensure adequate staff training around processes to manage the risk. Risk assessments are the mechanism by which you assess what measures to put in place. Now, the update from last week from the First Minister from the 25th of January 22. Updated guidance will recommend that from Monday the 31st of January, 2 days ago, employers should consider implementing hybrid working, following appropriate guidance with workers spending some time in the office and some time at home. Now, in my opinion, and that's the opinion of various people here in Scottish engineering, this statement basically already reflects the reality of the situation, whereby many companies have already started moving staff back into the office of the factory. Now, such movement will have to be fact-specific and very much based on a thorough risk assessment as well. Right, so recent case law. Maybe some people have seen this case being highlighted in the press. Alette versus Scarsdale Grange Nursing Home Limited. And again, if you're a bit of an employment law nerd like me, you can read the full case at that hyperlink there. Now, this is regarding a care worker in a care home refused vaccination situation. So it's not going to be absolutely appropriate or applicable to every situation, but the employment tribunals are going. In this case, the care worker refused the vaccination for no good reason. The person was ultimately dismissed. The tribunal found that dismissal to be fair. Now, it's a first instance decision there, so it's not binding. What first instance means, it was a basic employment tribunal decision. It's not at the employment appeal tribunal or the court of session or the high court or any of the appellate courts. So therefore, it's not binding on future employment tribunal decisions. Now, very interesting quote from the employment judge who heard this case. I was not persuaded that the claimant's actions in relying on unidentified internet sources and believing that there was a conspiracy about vaccination constituted a reasonable refusal of the management instruction to have the vaccine. Now, if that person had a reasonable refusal, for example, an underlying medical condition, then this case might have been decided differently. However, this person relying on conspiracy theories, that wasn't a reasonable reason. So it's very, very fact specific, not least as it's a care home setting in England where vaccinations became mandatory. But again, it's perhaps a useful decision for employers. Now, I am hoping that we have one of our guest speakers on just now. If not, I will just move on. Yep. Samantha Boslam comes from John Peake Technology in Livingston, HRBP, very experienced, speaks with the legal team here. HR issues. So without further ado, Sam, you can just give us some experiences from the first line, please.
Yeah, of course. Morning, Kevin. Thank you. Morning, everyone. So as Kevin mentioned, I'm Samantha Boslam and I'm the HR business partner for JBT based in Livingston. So I'm sure like all of your companies, we've experienced a fair few challenges over the last couple of years. The main one being that COVID seems to be never ending for us all at the moment. So hopefully that starts to change a bit for us shortly. But overall, I'd say we've been really lucky over the last couple of years because we've been continuing to manufacture throughout. And, you know, based on around 70 of our shop floor employees, they've been in every day unless it's been, you know, an isolation case or a positive case. But even at that, it's not been too extreme. Maybe more so at the beginning it was, but that's certainly reduced. And in terms of, you know, any employees who have had any positive cases or had to isolate for any reason, and they've maybe had any pre-booked holidays, we've given them back in return if they've been able to prove their positive COVID result or any isolation reasons. So that's worked out really quite well for us as well. And we've also been in a lucky position with our customers. We've not had any customers request any vaccine statuses. It's just been a negative lateral flow test. So again, we've been really lucky there. And in terms of any restrictions, you know, around social distancing and wearing of face masks, I would say overall it's been pretty good, but there's still been many occasions where we've had to remind employees to wear their masks when moving around the shop floor, when they're not in a situation where they can't social distance, that type of thing. But I think what our next challenge is going to be is when we start to phase people back into the office who haven't been there throughout the last couple of years. That's going to prove quite difficult. So it's just kind of trying to manage people's expectations. But what we have gained from this is more flexibility around a kind of hybrid working approach, which is hopefully something that people will find positive and get on board with. But thank you.
Unmute, Kevin.
I was on mute, yes. Rookie error, I do apologise there. I'm hoping that we have our second guest speaker on, Jan.
Hi, Kevin.
Excellent, thank you very much. We have, let me just move over, HRBP with Waukesha Bearings in Glasgow, Jan Peart. Again, similar with Sam, very, very experienced HRBP, covers the whole range of sometimes quite adversarial HR matters as well in an industrial setting. So without further ado, Jan, over to yourself, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. As Kevin mentioned, my name's Jan Peart and I'm a HR business partner for Waukesha Bearings based in Glasgow. As we have been hearing this morning, the COVID pandemic has brought with it many challenges. And I would say one of the biggest challenges facing Waukesha Barons currently is the discussion around returning to the office. So we still continue to have many employees working from home. And whilst initially it was the company's preference to return everyone to the office, what we are finding is that many employees are challenging why this is required. You know, and they have demonstrated that they have been able to work from home successfully throughout the pandemic. So therefore they are questioning if there is a need for them to return to the office, you know, on a permanent basis, or if at all. What we've also found is that we are losing some key talent, unfortunately, as people seek other opportunities elsewhere that do offer them greater opportunities for flexibility. And during recruitment, we are finding that there is much more emphasis placed on flexible working arrangements from candidates who are considering offers of employment. So with that in mind, the company has had to have a rethink about our approach. And in order to remain competitive, to retain our key talent, and to support our employees' needs, we have had to shift our thinking and what our plans are. So this has prompted us to develop a hybrid working policy. We're just actually in the process of concluding this and rolling this out to the business. But the intention is to allow employees to request flexible working. And we plan to do that on a more informal basis. So obviously employees have the statutory right to request flexible working, whereas we want the hybrid policy to be a bit more of an informal model that gives managers and employees the flexibility to agree an arrangement that works both for the employees' needs and the needs of the business. So we will be rolling that out. I'm sure that will also bring with it some other considerations, and I'm sure I'll be keeping Kevin in the loop as that develops with what considerations that brings with it. In a more practical sense though, what we've also found with the return to the office discussion is it's just not as straightforward as telling everybody, here's the date, you know, return to the office. We've had many sites that have actually closed down now for almost 2 years. So as well as, you know, having the employees ready to return to the office, we're having to make sure that those buildings and facilities are ready to have people back. So as Kevin touched on, you know, risk assessments are needing to be carried out. We're needing to make sure, you know, that electrical appliances have been tested, that fire alarms are being tested, that there's adequate water supplies, etc. So all of that requires some careful planning and consideration as well. And I think just the last point from myself, just kind of touching on what's already been discussed, is it's just trying to keep people motivated and engaged in following the protocols. What we're seeing is that there's been many changes in regulations and protocols over the last couple of years, and people are generally getting a little bit tired or confused now with what the guidance is, particularly managers who are maybe managing employees over, you know, different locations. So Scotland and England, there's sometimes differences there, even in the requirements for isolation. So it's just trying to keep people, you know, aware of what those regulations are and keeping people motivated and engaged to follow them. And in order to do that, we're just trying to make sure that we're communicating with our employees regularly, that we are refreshing this information, and sending out, you know, updates as and when things change. We've also got some key contacts as well within our HR department and health and safety department, where people can reach out to those specific people who, you know, have been very close to the pandemic throughout it and have the knowledge of the requirements to give support where required. Okay, so thank you for your time this morning.
Ideal, Jan, thank you very much, and earlier thank you very much to Sam as well. Now, I want to move over now just to basically a question and answer session. You got my contact details there, and as Dermot, my colleague, has mentioned in the chat, you can ask questions of us just now. Let's go back. So let us just go. I think we have a first question from Rodney over at Mitsubishi. Implemented a policy where employees could change, have a contract change to have fixed days working from home, 2 and 3. That turned out to need a contract change direction and not really a flexible approach to meet the business. We are now looking at a similar 2-day working from home that can be flexibly decided each week pending business needs. So again, that looks like a major change, or a change that was implemented by Mitsubishi there as well. Rodney, if you're on, could you give us a quick 1 minute discussion of how that went through, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we like many businesses here, we're thinking very early on about how we implement a new flexible lead, not just for what's happened through COVID, but also for what was mentioned there with regards to being able to retain some of our employees. So the push through the HR section was to have a deliberate contract change where you said, okay, you're in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you can have Thursday, Friday off, and the contracts were changed to suit that. In hindsight, which is where we are now, it looked like by doing that, it was really, really restricting the ability of the employee and restricting the ability of the business in terms of being able to position that person which best suits the businesses and where best suits their personal circumstances. So we're trying to go back and look at it again and change it to say, okay, you get a 5-day working week, you're in for 2, you're off for 3, but you can choose any one during the week without having that fixed contract change. So it was just a statement there to try and clarify that quite a difficult one that turned out to be towards the latter end of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Rodney. There, that's very useful. There was a message just before that as well from Dale Harris at ATL. Dale, you're mentioning a point about commuting being no longer a gain, but becomes a financial loss, and that's causing some resistance. Could you give us a brief bit of insight onto that, please, if you're there?
Yeah, hi. It's really just feedback from some customers that I've been dealing with, where they have people that are actively resisting coming back to work due to them. You know, they've had this extra money in their pocket for a long time now.
Yeah.
That they actually had as a gain, but they now see as, in inverted commas, theirs. It's always been theirs, but they see it not having to be spent now. And now returning to the office, they see them having to spend more money, especially with fuel prices and things like that, as they are at the moment. So I think the perception in people's heads is that becomes a loss that they don't want to have now, as opposed to it was a gain that they had for the last couple of years. So it's just a point on that.
That is, I mean, ultimately, telling a member of staff to work in the office is a reasonable management instruction, and it becomes all the more reasonable if you've got a bona fide business reason for it. If you can see that efficiency or effectiveness was reduced while people were working from home, you're unable to train trainees because experienced staff are working from home, or there's a delay in getting customer orders through because people are working from home, there's less communication, and all of those are good factors to justify getting somebody into the office. As I say, it is a reasonable management instruction to have somebody work in the office as well. And I think moving on to the third point there from Ronnie, main points he discussed for introducing a hybrid policy as opposed to just flexible working, and therefore request a contract change. Now, my understanding is a hybrid policy is just a subset of a flexible working policy as well. So it's something which directs and guides people to how they can work both flexibly in the office and in the workplace. And it's what you perhaps want to try and put in place initially to guide the overall direction of the staff, so they don't think they can apply for anything at any time. For guest speakers, Sam or Jan, I think you both mentioned hybrid policies. Any thoughts from your end?
I think similar to what everyone's talking about in terms of the fuel and people saving money, that's certainly going to be one of the issues that we're going to come across. But how we would like to approach it is just kind of trying to have a discussion with the employee and trying to be as flexible as possible, but also trying to show that, you know, when people are in the office more, it does, like, the engagement is higher, and that's kind of what we're finding with the people that do want to return. So we're just trying to think of different ways to encourage them back in, you know, whether it's things like maybe trying to do a lunch once a month, or, you know, having different engagement activities to make them look forward to coming back into the office. These different types of things, that's the kind of approaches we're looking at just now.
Okay, thanks. Jan, any further points from yourself?
Just to echo Kevin again, we're looking at dealing with it on a more informal basis as well. So an arrangement that basically works for the business and the employees. So, you know, we're asking managers to think about how many requests could they actually support, you know, at any one time from the same department, and maybe trying to introduce like a roster system. So, you know, we've maybe got so many people in the office on a particular day, and so many people working from home. And we're trying to handle it in a relatively informal basis where we possibly can. and basically we're putting a bit of the onus onto the employee to request what works for them, and putting
Right.
that to the business and then letting the business review it from there.
Okay, Jan, thank you very much. And Ronnie, I see that you've put your hand up there. You just want to say something verbally to us just now?
Yeah, sorry, I can't put my camera on just because where I am.
No worries.
Just to clarify what the question is, we've been operational right through like many other manufacturing businesses, and we've had the majority of our office staff back on site for a good year.
Yeah.
On a 60-40 average, so that the 60% of the time, their working time, excuse me, should be in the office. But I've just recently put out an email to all of those staff affected, saying if they want to continue on this informal agreement, that they need to put in a formal flexible working request. And I've got some resistance from a senior manager in that they want it to be a more informal approach. So I'm just wondering, I think it was Jan was saying that they've gone down more the informal approach for hybrid working, is that because everybody's just coming back in the office just now, or are they in the same position where a lot of people are already back in the office and now it's trying to make it a long-term change?
So to answer that one, Ronnie, so where we're at is we're a manufacturing site as well. So we've had a bit of a split where we've had a lot of employees continuing to work within the factory, and it's mostly been our support functions that have been working from home. So the reason we went for an informal arrangement was we thought if we do nothing at all, we're effectively enforcing people to, exercise their statutory right. And we don't know how many people are going to actually do that, so we might see an influx of requests. And obviously when there is a formal flexible working request, there's certain timescales, that the company are obliged to meet in terms of how they handle that request and respond to that request. So to try and ease some pressure from the business to, deal with a large number of formal requests at any one point, whilst it's quite topical at the moment, when we're trying to return people, we thought if we do a hybrid policy, which is more informal, it's more of an arrangement just between the employee, the manager, and it removes that need to respond within kind of set definite timescales. It also means that you're maybe not as restricted on the reasons for declining that request, and it's to encourage a more open and honest discussion between the managers and the employees to kind of come to a comfortable arrangement from themselves. The view is that this is a shorter term arrangement, so it is to support employees with the transition back into the office after having been working from home for such a long period. However, if employees want to do this on a permanent basis, then we would encourage that they put in an actual flexible working request, for a permanent change. But the hybrid is like a bit of a stopgap, if you like, to transition arrangements to allow people to transition back into the office.
Okay, thanks, Jan. That's what I just wanted clarification on.
Sure, no problem.
Again, sorry, I'll mute again, apologies. So just going back to the chat just now, Rodney brought up something very obviously very apt regarding working from home and risk assessments of the home environment, because the home might not always be suitable. And David from Finlay Irvine, and disciplining somebody who was out and about when they should have been self-isolating. And do you want to give us a little bit of the background to that, please, David? Just a brief overview.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's David from Finlay Irvine. We're a manufacturer as well, and we've been going through all the challenges the same as everybody else in terms of home working and the balance between it and trying to get it right. But one of the challenges we had just before Christmas was a person that was employed here who had a contact at home. So under the guidance, he should have been at home isolating for 10 days. We were obviously paying him the sick pay for that. And at the same time, we had other staff coming to us telling us, reporting that he was out and about. And it was witnessed on a couple of occasions that he was not just out in public, but out in restaurants and bars, socializing with other people. So we went through a disciplinary route with him. But in the end, we actually backed down because his argument was that he was doing this in his own time. and that the government guidance was guidance and not law. And I just wondered if anybody else had had any sort of similar experiences.
Happy to open up to the panel. Anyone here who has had similar experiences, please feel free to come. It appears not, David.
A little bit late there, Kevin.
No, crack on, Jan.
So David, I was just going to say that, yeah, we've came across something similar. We actually had a case down in our Ellesmere Port facility where employees had gone out to lunch together and had shared a vehicle. And that was at the time where obviously, you know, restrictions were pretty, you know, clear not to do that. And we had investigated that employee with a view to taking them to disciplinary. And their response was, you know, well, it was in my lunch break, I wasn't getting paid, it was my own time, that was my choice to do that. But if I recall correctly, the company actually took a different view, and we took the view that, yes, we acknowledge that it was your own time. However, your actions then had potential consequences for the company. Unfortunately, one of the employees was positive. It then led that to the other employee who was in the car with them contracting it. So then all those employees had to isolate. So there were implications for the company, even though his actions were on his own time. And the company did actually proceed with the disciplinary on that basis.
Yeah, it's obviously a very tricky one where they're arguing that what they're doing in their personal time, and that's one part of it. The other part is, you know, what we were facing was guidance rather than law.
Sure.
So they were breaking guidance, and it wasn't very good practice, etc., etc. But you know, the other side to it was, if he'd told us he wasn't going to isolate, we probably wouldn't have made a different decision. We would have probably still sent him away, still paid him. You know, so what actually was the difference to the company until the point where he was due to come back and potentially then maybe had further COVID contact. But yeah, it's a tricky one, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, folks. I think
Kevin, it's Rodney. Have you got a bit of advice there? Because that's a really interesting one, isn't it? About bringing the company into disrepute by failure to comply with guidance during a pandemic. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's potentially a very valid head of disciplinary against somebody. Certainly, if they are out in a company livery and a company uniform on company time, then that most certainly brings it into disrepute. The further that the person starts moving away from company activities, the less likely as you'll have a good disciplinary case. But the closer they become, and certainly as Jan mentioned earlier on, if it has a potential impact, or if it even actually does have an impact on operational efficiency by somebody having to go off sick or self-isolate, sorry, then yeah, it could be justified, most certainly.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that.
Okay. Right. It is now 22 almost, so it's run on a little bit. I'm happy to remain on to answer any further questions by chat and or verbally just now. Anyone have any further questions just now? I think we've lost one of our guest presenters though, unfortunately. Any more for any more? If not, I will thank everyone for attendance today. The copy of the recording and the copy of the slides will be sent out over the next couple of days. Thank you very much, folks, and have a good day. Cheers. Take care.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.